So the other day I got a letter from a Mrs. Harris from Leamington Spa, and it read, "Love your videos, Nigel," which I thought was quite a good start, "but why don't you cover anything from the 17th century?" And you know what? I think she's absolutely right. And as luck would have it, this is where we are. Well, we're not in the 17th century at all, obviously, because I'm filming this and you get the picture. Anyway, we are somewhere else, and I'm going to tell you about a story which is actually slightly more than a story. It's an actual account of how a trip to a fair, a visit to a pub, ended up with an encounter with some of the devil's henchmen. And, not to spoil it, but it didn't really end that well. So it all started like these things generally do, with a pint of beer. And I'm sure that Mr. John Leech, which was his name, I'm sure that he had great intentions of going to Whittlesea Fair. But we have to ask ourselves, was that really his master plan? Anyway, gloss over that. So he's on this big journey, and what is he going to do? He decides, like most things, that he needs a bit of a pick-me-up. So he goes several miles up the road on his horse, trotting along. I guess you do that on horses. And he gets to probably Ramsey, and he encounters an inn. He's on his horse, enjoying the countryside, and he figures, do you know what I need? I need a little bit of a pick-me-up. So what does he do? He goes to an inn. Now he meets a friend there, which suggests to me that this was a little bit of an organised stop, shall we say. Oh yes, by the way, did I not say we're early in the morning? He's only just left. He's only done a couple of miles. I mean, it's not like, he's halfway there. It's about 10 miles or so. He's only a little bit there. Anyway, he meets up with his friend, and they decide to go and have a drink in this inn. Now, whether he meets in the inn or whether he meets his friend outside, we'll never know. But he ends up at this inn, and they decide to have what's called, now I love this expression, it's called morning drafts. And a morning draft is basically drinking in the morning. Yeah, it's not even like an afternoon or lunchtime draft. No, this is morning draft. Now, we all know nothing ever bad has happened from having an early morning drink. Anyway, let's see what happens next. So there they are, drinking, chatting. Now, the account of the innkeeper describes Mr. Leech as, another fantastic expression, almost drunk. Now, almost drunk, you're either drunk or you're not. Almost drunk, that's that borderline between, yeah, well, we all know. Anyway, they're sitting there, they're by all accounts getting a little bit rowdy, and it's clearly time to move on. However, Mr. Leech has a bit of a dilemma. Yes, he wants to go to the fair, but do you know what? This is great. He's with his mate, he's drinking, he's feeling fantastic. What does he do? So he gets a little bit carried away with himself, and he makes a proclamation. And the proclamation is this: whoever shall leave this place shall be taken away by the devil. Undoubtedly, they laugh about it, and they do what most people would do in that situation. They have another drink. So time goes by, and it gets to that point where he thinks, do you know what, I guess the guilt might be kicking in. Do you know what I need to do now is I need to actually leave. I need to actually try to get to this fair. So he calls for his horse, and he's about to leave, and his friend says, hang on a second, John, hang on a second. Are you not worried about your proclamation? And he says, no, honestly, hey, look, the size of me, no one's going to be taking me. They're not going to be dragging me anywhere. I'll be absolutely fine. Now he's setting off on his horse, and he's going along. And there's that thing that happens sometimes when you're drunk, is that you start to overthink things. And he seriously starts to overthink things. He walks backwards and forwards. He's going backwards and forwards. over this same spot. And what is he worrying about? He's worrying about that damn proclamation. Is he really safe? He certainly does not feel safe, because he spends the whole afternoon into the evening walking up and down in the middle of nowhere with his horse, thinking, what the heck have I done? And then his worst fear arrives in the shape of these two griffins, these devil's henchmen. These two griffins suddenly appear and they start to taunt him. And then, and you can imagine the terror of the guy, they grab him and then they shoot him up into the sky. They fly him up into the sky. And whilst he's up into the sky, they tear off of his clothes. Having torn off his clothes, they throw them down to the ground. And they then fly him. You know, you've got to imagine what's going on here. They fly him all the way towards Doddington. And then, above Doddington, up in the sky, they drop him. So they carry him, fly him for miles up into the sky. And then eventually, they drop him. And they drop him from a great height. And they drop him here, at Doddington Hall. The next morning, the workers came down to find this body on their land. He was bloodied and gored. So, in a bit of a panic, they went to go and get the master of the house. The master of the house, a very gracious man, decided the best thing to do was to prepare a room and to put this poor soul into the room, to see where they could help him. Once settled in the room, the master of the house came to see the man. The man recounted his sorrowful tale. And at once the master suggested whether he should go and get a minister. There was no way he wanted a minister. Mr. Leech was really adamant, I do not want a minister of any sort. Anyway, for his personal judgment, the master of the house decided that he was going to go and get a minister anyway. The minister came at once from March, entered the house, went up to the room. As soon as he walked into the room, this broken man, Mr. Leech, suddenly jumped out and tried to throttle him, tried to strangle him to death. It was a really brutal attack. And they managed to get the minister out, and they were so scared that they got Mr. Leech, they tied him to his bed, tried to sedate him. That didn't work. Eventually Mr. Leech broke from his bounds and started to jump around the room. So they shut the door and they left the door shut and they locked the door. The next morning they awoke and went to the door to listen to see whether they could hear Mr. Leech there. They heard nothing. Very carefully they opened the door. They walked in and what they found was Mr. Leech dead. Lying on the bed, his tongue was out. His whole body was black. And every single bone in his body had been dislocated. Was this tale a complete work of fiction? Well, I think there probably was some truth in the account. If you look at where he was going, the route he would have had to have taken, it kind of sort of stacks up. Undoubtedly, he did go through Bury or thereabouts, and he did end up in a pub. And he probably did have a few pints. Now, did he just get so completely hammered that he was really embarrassed and then made up this whole story? Was there an element of truth? We'll obviously never know. It makes for a really good legend and a really good tale. Multiple locations, you know, phantoms and different events, you know, a bit of intrigue, a bit of horror, all those fantastic things, which is great. But really, to me, the best thing is the fact that it is still being told. It's still a story. The art of telling stories, of sharing stories, is such an important thing. It allows you to represent the past in an entertaining way, imagine the future, or just comment on the current. It's fantastic. My name's Nigel Derbyshire. I'm a poet, author and creator. If you like what you've just seen, you want more. You don't want anything like what you've just seen, but you want to tell me what you want to see, that's fantastic. I'd love to get your feedback in the comments below. Remember, please do subscribe, do like and share, because that way we can have an interaction. You can be part of the storytelling process, which I think is fantastic. It was amazing when I decided to make this film, of all the random people I would encounter. First of all, there's a situation where I filmed some stuff. The sound was absolutely shocking, so we just killed that. So I then went back and decided about how I was going to film it again. Interestingly, went to a different location, went into these fantastic old ancient woods, and then met the guy who looks after the woods. We had a great conversation around who used to own the stuff and everything. Then later on, when I was filming over towards Doddington, I met a local historian who was slightly dubious about the story, but actually did know the story. Again, fantastic. On that day, when when the sound didn't go to plan, I ended up writing an article, sharing it online on my blog, and then also meeting up with some random people in a pub. Again, interacting with life. So it just goes to show you, creating content sometimes is not necessarily about the content itself. Sometimes it is about the creative process in its widest sense. Sometimes it's just about meeting other people, just experiencing the texture of life and what that has to offer us. I like the texture of life. If you want to talk about it, read about it, and talk to your mates about it, whatever, there's an actual book here of my stuff. It's poetry, some articles. It's called Mindful Cornucopia by Nigel Derbyshire. That is, of course, me. So why don't you take a look? There'll be a link below where you can do so. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this stuff, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.